Good morning once again, all of you. I hope you are not sleeping. Hopefully not, right? It's very difficult, I know. I know. I also went through the similar process when I first arrived here. You know, if you live in a time zone which is 12 hours apart, it's very difficult. I know some of you from the Americas around this region, most probably it's okay. Some of our Asian friends, most probably they're getting quite difficult. And some of European friends, it's time to party, so they are also okay, right? Perfect. So it's always pleasure to start the lecture, and this is my, I think, third year. I'm taking this course. This course is known as UP's Foundation course. I'll go about, the details about this later on. Okay. So. Can some of us move on this part? Because the security people tell us to have at least some distance in between these doors so that if there are any emergencies, we can evacuate ASAP. Yeah, this part, so that we have all this empty space. Can we do that? We also need to take care of security because this is a very, natural disaster prone country. So we don't know when the earthquake comes, right? Okay. I heard there are some problems with logging into our Moodle. A lot of students. Some of you. Okay, let's put that. Almost everybody. Okay. From the IT people, they told me that you have your email address, right? You got your email address. Just put the first name. So my name is Manish Thapa. My email is mthapa. I don't know where is my. So M Thapa. So when I have to log into the system, I just put M Thapa. Just that. And then the password is UPs with capital U, all small letters, and 17.
The problem isn't logging in. The problem is it won't let us go to the virtual classroom once we do. Because it won't let us input an email, and it makes you fill out a profile.
Okay.
And we can fill out our name, but we can't put an email in. The box will not let us.
Okay.
But you need to because it keeps going invalid email and it won't let us do anything else.
Okay. Then there is a serious problem. Okay. Then we thought. Okay. So what we can do? Yes.
They did, if you check your emails, they have forwarded today's readings attached to the email that you do have, so you can have access to tomorrow's required readings.
Yes. Well, we're going to keep on doing that unless and until all of you can enroll in that class because that is very important because all of your work has to be uploaded there, so that's also very must. Yeah, you have something to say?
Yeah, but we don't have tomorrow's reading yet. So.
I think it's already been sent again. Yeah. We'll keep on sending unless and until this problem is resolved. Okay, Sirle Mata, who is my support officer, is going to send you all the readings till this matter is resolved. And then I'll again talk to the IT guy and hopefully you'll all to show him what is the problem and most probably we can find a solution and then we can also send another email telling how to go about with the system. Okay, I'm not an IT guy, so sometimes I also need a lot of support. Okay, so I'm going to coordinate this course. This is a 3 weeks period of the course. Obviously, I'm not going to give all the lectures. There are different lecturers who's going to come. For example, for tomorrow, we have Ross Ryan who's going to come and teach. So, all the day you will have different lecturers. The only thing is then we also have seminar because the format of this bigger courses is basically we have, 1+2 model, which means 1 hour the lecturer will come here and give a lecture on a particular topic. He or she is going to, stress on that day. So each sessions, okay? And then after this 1 hour lecture, all of you will go to your seminar sessions, your different seminar group. You all have been divided into different seminar group that is on that wall. So you can know which seminar group you are in and who is going to be your seminar facilitators. This year we have 5 seminar facilitators. Professor Mayumi Yamada, I don't think she is here. She is the head of she is the coordinator for doctoral program. Professor Alonso Munez. Alonso is not here. He's the coordinator and professor at the Ramset program. Some of you are part of that program. Then we have Yana. I can see Yana. Yana is our doctoral student on her last year. And she's been helping me with this course for the last 3 years. Then Maria Teresa. Yes, Maria Teresa is also another doctoral student we have in her last year, and she's also been very supportive of me for the last 3 years on this course. And then we recently have a new doctoral student, Feresa. She's from Germany, and she's also going to be another facilitator. So these are our 5 facilitators. So the format is basically after 1 hour, we'll have about 10 to 15-minute break, depending on how long the lecture went, okay? Because we also wanted to have a very engaged discussion during the seminar group. So, and then you'll proceed to your seminar group, okay? And each of the facilitator will have different activity, or we'll go into the discussion of the lecture that happened or on the topic, okay? Sometimes you might not have the seminar sessions. For example, today we don't have any seminar session because, you know, we had 1.5 hours, the ambassador talked, so we don't have that time today. For example, on next Monday, most probably I'm also not going to use the seminar facilitation. I'm going to engage all of this group here. So there will be different format, and the lecturer is going to announce that during their lectures, okay? That's how it's going to work. And the most important thing is you need to do the compulsory reading. And I am telling you that we're going to keep on sending the readings of each day on your email till the problem is solved, so that you have access to all the readings, okay? And I think you already know, if you want the copy of the reader, this looks like this big. You can, oh, somebody wants to see this? You can go to a store called Ziggy in Ciudad Colon, which is next to the bus stop. I think there is a particular guy who knows about this reader, so you can. She's a girl, okay, I don't know that. So she's going to give you the reader after you pay some money. How much is that? 12,000 colonists, okay, more about, okay? Okay, so these are the seminar groups. I think you're going to get this later on. You will see that on that wall, and then each of the class has also have the, you know, have that list of people who will going to be in that particular seminar group, okay? So these are the 5 seminar groups that we're going to be using. I've already talked about this. So I also told about the seminar facilitation and everything. So regarding your grading for this and assessment for this course, we're going to use multiple avenues in terms of grading you. So for example, your participation will consist of 30% of the total marks, and basically it's the participation during your seminar group. So each of your seminar facilitator will also evaluate you based on your participation in that particular seminar group, okay? So in terms of that 30%, 10% is your attendance. So attendance is very much important. And then also class participation about 20%. Then you have a midterm assignment, which is 20%. I'm going to talk about what is that, and most probably tomorrow also all of your facilitators are going to talk about and tell about and talk about what is going to be the group term assignment, the midterm assignment, and the final paper, okay, which is 50%. So basically, most probably tomorrow, I'm pretty sure that all of my facilitator is going to do that. So you're going to be divided into smaller groups of almost about 4 to 5 people in each group. So what you're going to do is, from today's session till session 5, you're going to pick any topic, and then you're going to present it to your classmates, okay? That's how it's going to be. But my requirement, and this is I'm telling to all my seminar facilitators, is to be creative, as much creative as possible to present the particular topic, okay? If some group wants to have a play, perfect, okay? So be creative, okay? So that's going to be the 20%, and we're going to have the presentation on 1st September 2017, which is, I think, the Friday, the second week, the Friday of the second week. Okay. And then the individual paper is basically, you can write of anything critically on the topic, which is been reflected here from session 6 to session 14. Okay. So you're free to choose any of the topic, and then you can go in detail, write a reflection paper of about 3,000 to 4,000 words. And then the criteria of assessment is also laid out there. I'll also send my slides today, so you'll also have all these things. Okay, and this has also been mentioned in the syllabus. Okay. I think we already talked about this a lot of times. I'm not going to waste the time because we already missed a lot of time today. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about peace and conflict studies as a discipline. Just let me give you my background. I started my career as a journalist. I used to be an editor-chief of one of the very popular youth magazine in Nepal, which was published in English, and I was also a publisher. So after that, I was, yes.
Sorry, you said you're going to send out previous slides. Are your slides generally online?
I can also upload in the system, and then I can also send by emails. Okay, that's how it's going to work. Okay. So yes, so I was asked around 2003 if I'm willing to be a political analyst for President Jimmy Carter, because at that time in Nepal, I'm from Nepal, we were going through a civil war, and almost 70% of our territory was controlled by the rebel group. So I was asked if I'm interested to work for him, and then I jumped in that wagon. So that's how it started. My whole career in the field of peace and conflicts really started. So when I came around 2004, after a year, I just felt that I really do not have a lot of knowledge and experience really to work on this field, because my previous undergrad was in economics, in developing economics, which really talks about different things. It talks about development, but really working in a conflict is a kind of a different cup of tea. So we really need a different set of skills. Obviously, I had some mentors during that time. One of the mentors that I was able to work for that 1 year was John Paul Lidrak, who is one of the famous in this field. So he also recommended me that you are very young, so most probably you really need a lot of knowledge. So then I did my master's in Austria, in a small university like this, called European Peace University, which is now disbanded, unfortunately. So after masters, I still felt that I didn't have that much of knowledge. And then I'm going to discuss this later in terms of the whole debate whether peace and conflict studies is really a discipline or not. There is always this argument, right? Whether it's a discipline, it's a separate discipline, or it's a discipline within, a sub-discipline within political science. Most of the countries, it's a sub-discipline within political science. In most of the Western countries, peace and conflict studies has been a sub-discipline within international relations. So this has always been a kind of struggle of this discipline, peace and conflict studies, to really stand itself as a discipline. Okay, so I really felt that and most of my professors who taught me, who were basically people from international relations, and then they also recommend me that maybe I should have another degree in international relations. So then I went to Canada at McGill, and then I pursued international relations. Then I came to stand on to really argue whether this is a discipline or not. So exactly 10 years ago, 2007, when I came back to Nepal, I was asked by the State University in Nepal to give the exact similar lecture that I'm giving today, really telling them whether peace and conflict studies is a discipline or not, because they got this huge grant from Norwegian government to start a department of conflict, peace, and development studies, and they really wanted to know whether this really need a separate department, or it can be a part of a program within a political science department. So I'm just following this lecture again here with all of you to justify that, how do we look into peace and conflict studies as a discipline, okay? So when you guys were having the first day of your orientation, I was sitting on that corner, if somebody recognized me or not, but at the same time I was also looking at the news, and this incident was happening in Barcelona. So I get a live feed from my CNN and BBC telling me that something wrong is happening in Barcelona, right? So let us watch what really happened there. Is there a sound? There's no sound? Okay, I don't think so we need a sound, but I don't know what is happening, but proof. Okay, let me go to the. It's not. Okay, we need to exit the slide. Okay, so this was the scene in Barcelona, and then followed in Finland, in a small town called, I forgot the name of the town. Tuk. Yes, that's what that one. Right? And this is everyday reality of the present, world. Right? This is one of the biggest challenges that we are really going through. I don't think so we need that because the picture is enough. Gerardo, picture is enough. And we are going through this chaos every day, in different parts of the world, right? The media only takes attention of the big cities like Barcelona, Paris, or Brussels, or London or Delhi. But there are also other countries, other parts of the world where this is a daily life, right? And this goes on, right? Every day, almost more than 100 people are killed because of the so-called terrorism, in the name of terrorism, right? So this has been a kind of a daily news material for all of us. Right? If something does not happen, then the days are, oh, thanks God, there's nothing happening this day. Right? So, okay, let me close this. So how do I go back to the slide? This is a very complicated computer. I'm a Mac guy, so you can tell me, so you can tell why I'm so much not into this computer. Okay, and then this was a very popular picture that we had last year, I think. You can just exit and then again come back. Yeah. And this is the picture that was so much into limelight last year. Very viral. Everybody, I think, almost all of us know this boy. Right? And this is the reality how kids are growing up in most of the violent regions of the world. Right? This was exactly the reality when I started working in Nepal in the Maoist insurgency we had for 10 years. Right? Because schools were bombed, schools were used as a barrack by both the military and the rebel forces, right? And kids has to go through this horrific experience of bombs, of losing their parents, their friends, right? So this is the hardcore reality of this world, of this current world, right? And this is very horrific. So this is exactly why, I justify that we need this discipline. This is exactly why we need to really understand why people really rebel. Because obviously tomorrow Ross will make a different point of view that, human inherently are very conflictual. Today what I'm going to make is my point that as a human being, we always want to live in peace, right? For example, we're trying to make this community of you peace. Right? This is the third day you are here, right? And most probably you already made a very good, strong friendship here. And this community here of almost 150 people, obviously I don't think so there is anybody who wants a war or a conflict. Is there anybody who really wants to create a conflict? Any hands? Right? So we really want to be peaceful. We really want it to be a kind of a community, a good community. So that is an inherent kind of intuition that we have as a human being. We really do not want conflict, right? I think that is exactly what human beings want, right? They wanted to live in peace. But obviously there are circumstances when then you have to be turned into violence. Right? So there are circumstances which compel you to be violent, right? A famous scholar called Paul Collier wrote a book called Greed versus Grievances. It's a very famous hypothesis in terms of why human beings really go into violent armed conflict or armed rebellion. Either there is a greed, right? We are greedy, we want more oil, we want more resources, we want more for ourselves, right? So that is a greed aspect in terms of why we want to go into war or in conflict with others, or there is a legitimate grievance. People are discriminated, right? I see this year we have a lot of Indian students, and especially in South Asia we have, people born out of class which are untouchables, right? And that's a reality, right? So that is a kind of a legitimate grievance of these people, because as a human being we are all equal, right? We cannot be born as a touchable and untouchable, or one who are born out of the golden or silver spoon on their mouth, and one who do not have anything, right? So there are also legitimate grievances why people like to rebel, right? So we'll go through these theories, right, later on. So this is a statement which was, I always use this statement by my mentor. He is also a very famous scholar in this field. So he mentioned this in 1998 during an acceptance speech of an award. Every day it seems that our morning papers are splashed with headlines announcing another perplexing addition to the dreadful list of unresolved and violent conflict. Gruesome explicit photographs accompany the horrid details of stories of suffering from Bosnia to Rwanda to Burma. We are easily left wondering about the future of our globe. But at the same time, through negotiations are proceeding and peace accords are being signed from Middle East to Guatemala. The combination of extensive fightings and a continual search for peace raises interesting questions about where things stand across our globe, nearly a decade since the end of the Cold War. And this statement has been, spelled out 20 years ago, right? And we still are at the same position, right? Right? The same thing, the Barcelona, the same thing in Syria, the same thing in Afghanistan, the same thing in Iraq, the same thing in India, the same thing in Pakistan, the same thing in Burma, right? So, we are still struggling on the same aspect, the same issue that has been raised by John Paul Lederach in 1996. The world is the same. Obviously, there are some good studies that is happening. For example, the ambassador today mentioned about the treaty to disband nuclear weapon. There are obviously some progress which is happening. For example, last year, Colombia signed a peace accord, with FARC rebels, right? So obviously, there are some good stories, good news. But obviously, at the same time, we also have a lot of problems and challenges that we have to work together, combinedly, right? And on top of that, John Paul Lederach's 1996, I think now our environment is also putting us in a different challenge because of the way the whole humanity performed over the last, thousands of years, really not really honoring, the way we have to protect and love our environment. And I think that is also another challenge that we're going through, right? So every day we are seeing a different pattern in environment, especially in our weather, right? The weather patterns is really changing. We're having extremes, floods, extremes, rainfalls, extreme heat in different parts of the world. Right? So that is also another challenge that has been added up. Apart from the challenge we have internally, there is also an external challenge that we are confronting every day. Right? I don't know, a country called Maldives? Yes, it's a small, tiny nation in South Asia, right down Sri Lanka. Hopefully in 10 years' time, and I'm very hopeful that it's not going to vanish, but the scientists are predicting that this country, this tiny land, will be vanished in 10 years' time. If the rate of, temperature is going up like this, most probably it'll get vanished. It's a beautiful country. So I recommend you to visit that country before it gets vanished. And that's the reality, right? So this is another challenge that we are really facing, and that is the reason why we really need to have this discipline. So that is my second thing. Let me go into the philosophical foundation of peace and conflict studies. Obviously, this really do not come from sky or, it's just in there. There are also a lot of philosophers who really spend their life in terms of really kind of, orienting us that we really need to work for peace. For example, one of the famous documents we can find in the prehistoric time is, and the great philosopher is Immanuel Kant, who talked about perpetual peace, a philosophical sketch, which was written in 1795. So, if we really go into the philosophical discussion, this is one of the first documents which really talked about this discipline, really existence of this discipline. Obviously, perpetual peace is being used in all discipline, like in political science and international relation. That is a foundational, literature for the start of all these disciplines. But obviously, one of the central thesis of perpetual peace, and with its head, its title, we should really work for peace. Right? That was the inherent message that it gave. So this has been the foundation for peace and conflict studies, but as a field, it started around 1960s or 1950s or 1960s, and started from Europe and in America. I'll go back to that later. Obviously, there is always a controversy in terms of when the peace studies really started. It is believed to have commenced in the wake of the American Civil War in 1860s. Right? There are some universities and scholars we were really trying to understand the various dynamics of how human rebel against others, and really trying to understand different challenges that the world is facing. There is an essay called An Early Tendency of Peace Education in Sweden, which really traces the origin of the peace studies in the 19th century. But what is important is mostly we see the growth of peace and conflict studies, or peace studies, basically when the world is experiencing or going through a very hot war. For example, the two world wars, the two horrific world wars. Obviously, after each of its termination, all the scholars and practitioners really worked very hard in terms of avoid the next catastrophe. It happened in the First World War with the foundation of the League of Nations, and it exactly happened after the Second World War with the foundation of the United Nations. And this was an architect, a global architect, which was put in place for us to work collaboratively so that we can reduce tension, through this institution. Right? So that was the whole point, right? And then accordingly, the scholars also started working on to really understand different dynamics and different challenges that we are facing. Right? Obviously, the whole field of peace studies really also became very, very famous, especially and very popular, and it's really started. It really spearheaded after the Vietnam War in the United States, and especially some religious tradition like Mennonites, Lutherans, what are the other pacifist tradition? Quakers. So these are the founding, religious faith, which really kind of funded as well as spearheaded a lot of peace studies program all over the world, and especially in America. And then obviously, subsequently with the Vietnam War and with this world wars, there are also peace movements which really started, right? And that also kind of spearheaded. So what I see now as one of the scholars in this field, that after the 72 years of the first bomb that dropped in Hiroshima, there is almost more than 200 peace studies program existed all over the world. Either we talk about North America or in Western Europe, or even in developing countries, in Africa, in Asia. So obviously the field has really expanded, and there are many universities which are adopting peace and conflict studies, as a discipline, right? Obviously, there is always a challenge whether it's an independent department or it's a kind of a subset within a political science or international relation. But at least, scholarly world really recognize the importance of this field. So that is the reason why now there has been studies in bachelor's level or master's level and doctoral level, which has been conducted. At the same time, there are researchers like us who also do a lot of research in terms of understanding and growing this field. Right? So it is going in side by side. And then obviously there are journals which are dedicated to that. Right? For example, one of the very famous journal, even in international relations, even in the political sciences, Journal of Peace Research, which is one of the highest impact factor journal in the world. I think this is the second highest impact factor journal in the whole field of international relations. So Journal of Peace Research is one of the very influential journal, meaning that the scholarly world is really engaging in terms of developing the new theoretical framework, trying to develop a new understanding of confronting the challenge that the humanity is facing, right? So that is a testimony that this can stand alone as a single field. I already talked about this. The first peace studies program in America was in 1948 with the Manchester College. And then it was sponsored by Brethren Church. Especially when we talk about peace and conflict studies, most of this pacifist religious tradition, especially in Christianity, has a lot of contribution, and especially Bethrens, Mennonites, Quakers are some of the leaders and one of the passionate contributors for the growth of the peace studies. And then obviously Peace Research Institute were established in Europe in 1960s, especially promoting research. For example, the field really got prominent, and we can always call it as a discipline because there is this two research institute, the Peace Research Institute of Oslo, PRIO, which was established in 1959, and the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, in 1966, are the two prominent research and think tank, especially in our field, which basically conducts a lot of research in the field, right? And they are one of the most prominent research institute, not only in peace and conflict studies. They are also subsequently been cited by international relations and political science, and even other social sciences. Right? So that is also another testimony that peace and conflict studies can be an independent department. Then obviously I talked about Journal of Peace Research, which is which is prominent journal, which was established, which was set up by and published by PRIO in 1964, along with the Bulletin of Peace proposal began in 1970s. Why the journal is very important is, in order to be established as an academic field, there needs to be a journal, right? Then you can always challenge other fields that we have our own journal, we have our own sets of thinking, we have our own sets of research that we are publishing, right? And in academic world, this is a very, very hierarchical world, which I hate totally. But in academic world, unless and until you get published, unless and until you have your views been referred and cited, you cannot really consider yourself as a field or as established field, right? So that is also very important. So what I'm telling is, and what I'm challenging to other fields is, for example, Journal of Peace Research is the second highest impact factor journal in the world, meaning that other fields are also referring to our journal. So that is enough for us to really challenge other field that we are an independent, field. Right? I also talked about this. For example, Vietnam was very important. So there are a lot of private colleges. We started a peace studies program. For example, Manhattan College started in 1968. Colgate University in Upper New York State, New York, also started in 1969. So Vietnam War really played a very important role. In Europe, we can see two major prominent peace studies centers, one in Uppsala in Sweden and one in Gothenburg. I know there is somebody from Uppsala who are in this group who studied in Uppsala, yes. So I was also at Uppsala in 2010 as a visiting fellow. So Uppsala University, especially the Uppsala Conflict Data Program, is one of the very prominent research think tank, as well as it's a database that we all can use. And they also have a master's program there with the Department of Peace and Conflict Research. And there is also another one in Gothenburg, which is the Peace and Development Research Institute at the Gothenburg University, which was founded in 1978. So this also kind of prominently established peace studies program and peace studies discipline in Europe. And they are very prominent ones. And both of them, especially Uppsala, is one of the most prominent department in this field. In England, 1973, Bradford University, still it's one of the most prominent departments within the English school. Recently, the London School of Economics, they also started a master's program. So even Oxford University, they have a peace and conflict studies as a sub-discipline within the political science. So prominent universities there also started following up. And then, especially in 1980s, we saw peace studies program growth in a lot of colleges, and especially at that time, the world was undergoing through exactly the similar challenge that we went through last 2 weeks about the nuclear weapon, right? the proliferation of the nuclear weapon. And at that time, especially the Cuban Missile Crisis really kind of, wake up the whole humanity about the dangers of the nuclear weapons, right? Exactly that happened, this whole 3 weeks period between the US and North Korea. We went through a similar kind of challenges around that time, and that also gave rise to a lot of programs in different universities. Okay, and a lot of research were done. One of the challenges in terms of standing alone as a discipline is to define key terms and terminologies and key research sets, because as a discipline you also need to kind of have your own sets of methodology in terms of how you're going to prove yourself as an independent or different from the other discipline. Right? That's always been a challenge. So, for example, if you look into the methodologies and the unit of analysis, especially in the middle of 1980s until the late 1980s, most of these peace and conflict studies program were basically focused on research about international conflict and threats of nuclear destruction, because that was the challenge, that was around that period of time. Because the world was undergoing through a Cold War, so there were a lot of conflicts between different countries, right? So that was another challenge, and the Cold War itself was a biggest challenge in terms of how it was really evolving, right? And at that time, if you also go through the history of the United Nations was not so effective, because obviously in the P5, the two superpower, the USSR at that time and the United States was kind of creating a lot of challenges. It was kind of fighting different proxy wars, right, using different client states. So obviously, the focus of the peace researchers at that time was to really confront and to understand these dynamics. Right? So that was basically a kind of focus of the peace studies program. And then obviously, in order to confront this challenge, we even saw, independent university dedicated to this field. For example, UPeace is one, which was established in 1980s, and you are part of this movement, you are part of this university, right? And there was also another one in Europe, which is European University Center for Peace Studies, where I did my master's, which was started in 1989, which was also an independent university kind of, providing, only one master's program in peace and conflict studies, right? So we even saw universities fully dedicated for this field, right? And this is amazing development around that time. So with the end of the Cold War, the world see a different challenge, and this is very important and very interesting, and it also helped in the growth of the peace and conflict studies, because during 80s, for the peace studies program, it was very difficult to separate it from the international relations, because basically the focus of international relations and the focus of the peace and conflict studies was the same. It's the same unit of analysis looking into international conflict, right? That's what the international relations also do, right? To understand international conflict, the international dynamics, how international systems work, right? So it was very, very difficult for us to really separate from them. And most of the scholars, if you see in the peace and conflict studies, were from the international relations. Right? So that was a major challenge around that time. But after the end of the Cold War, the world started seeing a different sets of challenges. All of a sudden, overnight, the world changed after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the integration of Soviet Union. Then we see a rise in internal conflicts. We see rise in civil wars in various countries, like 1994, Rwanda genocide, right? Many different conflicts were formed, were fought. For example, 1996, we had a Maoist insurgency in Nepal, right? And there were ongoing long insurgencies in part of Latin America, in Colombia, right? And similar in South Asia, India, Afghanistan. So all of a sudden, we see a rise of internal conflict. Then our field kind of get a kind of a breathing space, saying that now we can focus into internal conflict, right? Because there is a different set of challenge that is going on, right? So from international politics to domestic scene, covering issues of structural violence, civil war, civil violence, and different sets of challenges that were ongoing in that world, in that part, in that century. So still obviously we are still considered as the subfield in political science with international relation, but we have developed an independent field with many universities having separate departments, because now, especially after 1990s, the challenges that we're facing all over the world. For example, my own experience working in Nepal, we created a conflict, peace, and development studies within the largest, one of the biggest university in Nepal. In fact, in South Asia, a separate department which almost has more than 300 students, right? And it's an independent department. So it really started coming up even in Africa, in the countries where there are conflict. They realize that they really need to work on that. They really need to understand this dynamics. So the scholar gathered and then created an independent department rather than on the political science, which is basically talking about the domestic politics, and then international relations, which is basically having a different agenda, right? We really need a kind of a separate field which really try to understand this various dynamics, try to kind of unify all the discipline, because when we talk about violence, there it can be justified in from various disciplines, right? Psychology is one big field. Wherever there is violence, psychology plays a very important part. Politics, which also plays a very important part. Sociology, anthropology, because we really need to understand the culture and the context where the violence is really rising. So that also has a very important contribution to the field to understand that. Legal aspect, law, right? Because either we talk at the domestic level or international level, there is a set of rule that is being outlined there in order to understand that part of violence, right? So that also has a very important. And environment, right? Because it's not only challenge, because most of the conflict that we see is also arise because there is environmental implications, right? Either there is drought, we talk about in South Sudan, right? Or scarce resources, right, all over the world. So that also has a component. So kind of conceiving a discipline which has a kind of inputs from all this discipline, from this holistic perspective, right? We also have a research association, International Peace Research Association, which has a regional association all over the world. So as I told, that peace studies is a kind of a unidiscipline perspective. It's a unifying ground for all the discipline that we have. And here at UPeace also you see, different professors who comes from different discipline and different background. I come from peace studies, international relations. We have professor who comes from education background. We have professor coming from legal background. We have professor who comes from, environmental background. We have professor who comes from, gender background, with gender studies and, this discipline. Even media. So this is a kind of a unifying discipline, right? Where we try to address problems from this multiple discipline. So, because most of us scholars, obviously, we always have a debate within our faculty also. When we talk about violence, obviously my perspective will always be from international relation perspective, right? Because that's where I was trained in, right? And if we have another professor, for example, me here, who comes from a legal perspective, he sees that problem from his perspective, right? So our idea is to bring both perspectives and trying to understand it from a holistic perspective, right? So that we can execute a right solution to the problem, the challenge that we're facing in the world, right? So that, everybody can be part of that. I already talked about this. Obviously, one of the critique that we always get is that peace study is not a rigorous field of studies, because if you see in the other perspective, like for example law, they only handle the problem from the legal perspective, right? So that is a rigor, and that is why the field is a legal field, right? That is always a kind of concept in that way. And since peace studies really rely in a various discipline, there is always a kind of a critique that since you are not standing alone and you are trying to rely on different disciplines, so you do not have your rigor of your own. That is always a critique. But now the challenges that all of us is facing is so multifaceted that even discipline like international relations or in political science or environment studies or legal studies cannot kind of be proud of that statement, because now they need a kind of a multiple perspective and multi-dimensional approach. Right? And the other aspect of peace studies is that we are student-centered, because, for example, here, you come from all over the world. You come from your own context. You come from your own sets of challenges. You come from your own experience, right? So as a professor, we cannot really prescribe this is right or this is wrong, right? I cannot really prescribe, because my working background in South Asia, obviously I cannot prescribe in terms of how the gang violence can be addressed in the United States, which is the different sets of challenges that are going through, and I do not have that experience, right? So our perspective is to engage all of us, including us, to basically talk about that problem, right? Not to prescribe something. That is always the thing. So it's based on dialogue, not lectures. Value-laden in commitment to justice, obviously that is very important, right? Passionate in their aversion to violent human behavior. So this is basically a kind of a philosophy that we preach. And because we adopt this radical philosophy, so that is why we are often being criticized. And then obviously peace studies has become more conventional, is getting wider acceptance throughout the countries in the West, and even in the West, because most of if you see in terms of the rise of academic discipline, it's always been a Western, initiated. It's basically the West who basically defines what is discipline and what is not, right? Because coming from the developing South, it's really that we invent something, even though we do, it does not. Even Kautilya is from South Asia. Obviously, we do not get that credit, because the knowledge has been used by them, by the West, to create a discipline called economics, right? So that's how it always stays. So we are not really been given any kind of things, and it's also because especially in developing South, obviously the university and the scholarly system is not well developed, not well funded. So obviously the West take the lead. But now even in the West, because of the challenges they are confronting, especially terrorism, migration, urban violence, right? So we see the field is really being adopted. For example, 2 years ago, I received an email from London School of Economics. They wanted to set a program on peace and security studies. Right? So, gradually, all these prominent institutions are trying to talk about these issues. Right? Which is a relevant development, as previous peace studies are only looking at solutions to the larger global challenge. Now we are trying to focus on the challenges that each and every country is focusing and facing. Right? And this kind of gives a kind of a wider approach to our field. Let me now discuss some of the key figures. One of the key figures, and often referred as the father of peace studies, is Johan Galtung. He is regarded as the father of the peace studies because he started the Peace Research Institute of Oslo in 1959, and then he started Journal of Peace Research, the famous journal, in 1964. He's a pacifist who refused to serve for the military and accepted to lock behind the bars. There are a couple of people who knows about Galtung. Yes, you, and of course Feresa. So yes, so he has a lot of contribution to our field, and then later on we'll also discuss about his theoretical framework and his contribution on theories. He is also founder of Transcend. This is a peace activist scholar network. So this is one of the founding figure. There are other scholars, like I already talked about Johan Galtung, John Button, John Paul Lederach, Peter Wallister. So these are the names that you will come across over the years. William R. Zartman, who talked about negotiation, who is a basic, whole founder of the Harvard Negotiation Project, which is based in Harvard University. Louis Corser, John MacDonald, Louis Diamond, Adam Curl, Kenneth Boulding, Elise Boulding, Mary B. Anderson, William Ury, Rosa Fisher, Paul Rogers. So these are all some of the scholars who are often cited in our field and who contributed a lot of scholarly aspect in our field. There are leading peacemakers whom we are very proud of. For example, one come from Costa Rica, former President Oscar Arias, who is a regular visitor of this university. In fact, the student of IPS who takes the disarmament education will be able to meet him personally, who will basically talk about his journey of disarmament in terms of how he spearheaded the Arms Trade Treaty in the United Nations. So President Jimmy Carter, Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela, Kofi Annan, Desmond Tutu, Johan Galtung himself, Finnish President Matai Atasai. These are some of the leading peacemakers who basically are being referred, who basically deal as a negotiator in some of the complex conflict all over the world, right? So they basically offer their service. Obviously, we lost Nelson Mandela, but other people are very active and very, very active. For example, Jimmy Carter, I know, he's in 90s. He's recently had a cancer, but still active. Still very much active in working for peace. So now let me briefly touch on what is peace research after introducing this field, and then we'll have ample time for question. So the aim of peace research is to understand the cause of violence and find ways to minimize it or to remove that violence. So this is a kind of a central theme of peace research. So obviously, peace research also incorporates topical research, university level topical research, basically trying to understand from the scholarly point of view, university level teaching, so you are part of this, and then practical application in terms of how we can apply in the field, right? Knowledge obviously generated, but it only becomes useful when we can apply it, right, in the good of the humanity. Peace research is also sensitive to the historical changes and local circumstances, how it develops research agenda. And this is very, very true, especially in our field, because we confront on the present challenge. We confront on a lot of challenges that we're facing in different parts of the world. So that is the reason why the whole scope of peace research also kind of changes in terms of the challenges that we're facing. Just to give you an example, when I was doing masters, or even when I was doing my PhD, terrorism was not a big research agenda at that time, right? Because obviously there were some aspect of it, but it was not really a central core and agenda of the peace research. Now terrorism is one of the big research agenda, right? So it changes because we are now facing this challenge of terrorism every day in our life and society. Now all of the scholars are also trying to understand this dynamics of understanding terrorism, not from the policy perspective, but also from the scholarly perspective, and also in terms of how we can mitigate this problem, right? The other research agenda when I was doing my master's and my PhD was migration. Obviously, migration was a kind of a challenge, but it was not really being dealt in such an immense way in our field, right? But now, since migration has posing a lot of challenges of itself in different parts of the world, here in Costa Rica also, migration is one of the biggest challenges that Costa Rican government is facing at this point of time, right? So now migration, refugee, displacement has become one of the major, research agenda in our field, right? So journals are publishing articles on it, scholars are trying to work on it, right? So this also changes. For example, the other aspect was nuclear weapon. So when I was doing my master's 10 years, 12 years ago, nuclear weapons obviously was a challenge. Obviously we knew it, but there is so-called MAD, mutually assured, kind of a destruction. This is a kind of an architect the world, basically the superpower really agreed on that nobody is going to use it. So they are only going to use it as their defense, not as a first strike. Right? So we call it MAD, mutually assured destruction. So if somebody is using, obviously the world is going to be imploded, right? So that was not a big challenge. Now, over the last 2 months, nuclear weapons and denuclearization has become one of the biggest, scope, right? So, for example, last week only I applied a grant for a research on really working on the nuclear program between India and Pakistan. So you see, this suddenly started becoming another challenge. So it all depends on how we are facing different challenges. Accordingly, the peace research also kind of shift its focus. Right? So this is one particular kind of ways how we deal kind of things. So it takes different circumstances such as global historical changes, world wars, Cold War, end of Soviet era, global terrorism, etc. That will form agenda for discipline, and we devote our study on that. So, and then obviously we kind of take different events and different challenges, our focus in terms of how we understand and how we frame our theoretical framework and how we impart our education. For example, World War I was a trauma, right? So how we understand it was the loss of crisis control, And for the peace research, the topic was history and cause of war. So most of the peace research around focusing on the First World War, really trying to understand about the history in terms of what really happened wrong in the history, that the world came together and fight with each other, right? And then what are the cause of war? Similarly, League of Nations was an encouraging event. It's the event, the understanding of the event was aggression and need for rules, because the international system is so anarchic, so we need sets rules so that we can govern the international regime. Right? And then obviously peace research topic was international law, how we can govern the international governance, right? How we can put the international system into a regulation so that everybody would abide. Right? So that is a big research focus. Let's say Hiroshima is another trauma. This is the time when science was used for wars. So the peace research agenda was disarmament and arms control. Similarly, Mahatma Gandhi in India, it's an encouraging event, right? So the techniques that Mahatma Gandhi used, non-violence, was very unique, right? How a larger societal conflict can be addressed without use of violence, right? So non-violence was a kind of understanding of event. So the peace research topic is history and causes of non-violence. How we can use non-violence, the technique of non-violence, in addressing larger societal problems and challenges and discrimination. For example, non-violence was being used by Martin Luther King, right? Non-violence was used by Adam Michnik and what's his name, the Nobel Peace Prize winner in Poland, in Solidarity movement, right? So the use of non-violence became prominent, and then scholars started really understanding the intricacy of non-violence. For example, the environmental threats. It's a trauma. We are experiencing it together, all together, right? It's not only problem of one country. It's not only problem of us human beings. Right? It's the whole humanity as well as planets. All the creatures of these planets, right? So it's the fear of disaster and conflict, which is the understanding event. Now the peace research is really trying to understand scarcity, conflict, and cooperation. By the way, it reminds me, today is I think it's a solar eclipse, or yes. So the administration had told me not to look at the sun directly. If you have to look, you just have to look through the special glasses and be inside as much as possible. I think it starts from 12 o'clock. That's what it will start in Costa Rica, right? And I think it will go for half an hour. So during that time, please do not look at the sun. If you have to look, you have to have a special glass to look at it. Just a word of precaution, and that was the administration want me to rely, and I forgot. And when I talked about environmental threat, so that is another threat that is coming very soon. So we all be safe, right? Protect your eyes. That's what is the thing. Okay, so I stop here.